The wind had teeth. It bit at the land, tearing across the endless white plains under a sky the color of slate. Snow fell in a thick, silent sheet. A blanket meant not for warmth, but for burial. And in the middle of it all, a woman lay still. She was a frozen statue in a torn dress. Her hands were the color of a winter dusk, a deep and lifeless blue. Her face was pale, a porcelain mask of someone who had given up. She wasn't moving. She was barely breathing. Her name was Anna. And this was supposed to be the end of her story. She had once known warmth, a cabin, a husband, the tiny hands of a baby boy. That life felt like a dream someone else had lived. A fever had stolen her son. Raiders had stolen her home, and the people she had trusted, the settlers in her wagon train, they had stolen the rest. They called her a curse. Bad luck clung to her like a shadow, they whispered. When the journey got hard, their eyes grew cold. That morning, crossing a frozen river, they had made their decision. One man, her husband's own cousin, had grabbed her arm. "She's dead weight," he'd said to the others. "Already lost everything. She'll only slow us down." They didn't tie her up. They didn't need to. They just pushed her from the wagon and kept rolling, the tracks of their passage already vanishing under the falling snow. They left her there to die. Anna didn't even have the strength to cry. The pain had faded into a deep, hollow numbness. This was it. The world was fading to white. But then a sound, a crunch, the sound of a heavy boot pressing into deep snow. She thought it was a dream, a trick of a dying mind. Then another crunch. Closer. A figure emerged from the white curtain of the storm. He was tall, broad, wrapped in thick furs that made him look like a creature of the wild. His face was stark and severe, etched with lines of hardship. Long, dark hair, braided with leather, blew in the wind. He was a warrior. Cheyenne, by the look of his weathered gear. He stopped and looked down at her. His eyes, dark and piercing, held no pity. They held something harder, something that looked like recognition. He didn't say a word. He simply knelt, wrapped her in a heavy, warm buffalo hide he carried on his back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Anna tried to speak, to ask a question, but her throat was frozen shut. All she could do was stare at the grim line of his jaw as he turned and walked back into the storm, carrying her away from the lonely grave the world had chosen for her. Why had he saved her? A stranger, an enemy according to the men on the wagon train. How had he even found her in this endless, featureless wasteland? And as the world finally went dark, one terrifying thought echoed in her mind. What if he wasn't saving her? What if he was just taking what the settlers had thrown away? Anna awoke to the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. For a moment, she thought she was dead. But the dead don't feel the sharp sting of returning life in their fingers and toes. They don't feel the scratch of a wool blanket against their skin. She was in a small, circular lodge, built of wood and earth. A fire crackled in a stone pit at the center, its orange light dancing on walls covered in animal skins. It was warm. It was safe. The man who had carried her sat on the other side of the fire, sharpening a long, wicked-looking knife with a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone was the only sound besides the howl of the wind outside. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. They were just as intense as she remembered. He stopped sharpening the blade. Where am I?" Anna whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You are safe," he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble like distant thunder. He didn't offer his name. He didn't ask for hers. He simply stood, filled a wooden cup with water from a bucket, and brought it to her. His movements were deliberate, efficient. He wasted nothing, not a word, not a step. Anna drank, the cool water a balm on her raw throat. She looked at this strange, silent man. He had saved her life, and she didn't even know who he was. "Why?" she asked, her voice a little stronger. Why did you help me? He looked at the fire, his expression unreadable. The storm provides. The land provides. I took what it offered. His answer sent a fresh chill down her spine. He didn't say he saved her. He said he took her. Days turned into a week. Anna's strength slowly returned. The man, who she learned was named Tahu, cared for her with a silent, almost grudging efficiency. He would leave for hours and return with rabbits or fish. He would boil herbs that eased the ache in her bones. He never asked how she came to be in the snow. He never spoke of his own past. They existed in a strange, unspoken truce, two ghosts sharing a small, warm space while the world outside remained frozen. But peace like that is a fragile thing. On the seventh night, just as darkness settled over the land, the silence was shattered. It started with the sound of horses, then angry shouts in a language Anna knew all too well. English. Tahu was instantly on his feet, his hand grabbing the knife he was never without. He moved to the door flap of the lodge, peering out into the snowy night. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. She crept to a small gap in the lodge wall and looked out. 4 men on horseback, their figures dark against the snow. They were rough, bearded, armed with rifles, and one of them she recognized. It was Silas, her late husband's brother, the man who had convinced the others to leave her behind, but his face wasn't cold and indifferent now. It was twisted with rage. "We know she's in there, Cheyenne," Silas roared, his voice cutting through the wind. "We tracked you. Send out the girl." Tahu stood his ground, a silent, imposing shadow in the doorway. "She is not with me," he said, his voice calm, but Anna saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't lie to me. That girl is a thief. She ran off with my family's money, my supplies. She belongs to me." Anna's blood ran cold. Money? Supplies? It was a lie, a complete fabrication to justify what they'd done. He was hunting her. He hadn't just left her to die. He had come back to make sure the job was finished. Suddenly, one of the other men raised his rifle. A deafening bang echoed through the clearing, the bullet kicking up snow just feet from where Tahu stood. It was a warning shot. Tahu didn't flinch, but Anna knew. This wasn't over. They would be back. Silas wanted her dead, and he had a reason he was willing to lie and kill for. Later that night, after the riders had gone, the air in the lodge was thick with tension. The unspoken truce was broken. Tahu finally turned to her, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Why are they hunting you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "He called you a thief." Anna swallowed, her hands trembling. The moment of truth was here. She couldn't hide anymore. "Because," she whispered, reaching into a hidden pocket sewn inside her dress. "Because I have something. Something my husband left me. Something they killed him for." She pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. Her fingers fumbled with the drawstring. She handed it to Tahu. He opened it and tipped the contents into his palm. It wasn't money. It wasn't jewels. It was a single, strange object that glinted in the firelight. A small, intricately carved key made of brass. It wasn't a key for a door or a chest. The design was too complex, the shape too unusual. Tahu stared at it. Then he looked back at her. "What does this open?" he asked. Anna shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know," she confessed. "But I think it's the reason I'm still alive. And it's the reason they won't stop until they find me." The next morning, Tahu was already saddling 2 horses when Anna emerged from the lodge. The air was crisp and cold, but the endless snowfall had finally stopped. "You are strong enough to ride," he said, not looking at her. "We cannot stay here." "Who are they?" Anna asked, her voice tight. "Silas. He's my husband's brother. Why would he do this?" Men like that do not need complex reasons, Tahu replied, checking the straps on a saddle. Greed is simple. You have something he wants. That is all that matters. And so their journey began. They rode east, away from the wagon trail, away from the life Anna had known. They moved through dense forests of pine and skeletal aspen, their horses' hooves muffled by the thick snow. They crossed frozen rivers that groaned under their weight and navigated canyons where the wind screamed like a banshee. The land was a brutal teacher. Tahu showed her how to read the subtle signs of a trail, how to find dry wood for a fire, how to listen to the silence and hear the warnings it held. Anna, who had once felt so fragile, discovered a resilience she never knew she possessed. The grief was still there, a cold stone in her chest, but now it was surrounded by a growing fire of determination. But danger was a persistent shadow. One night, as they camped in the shelter of a rock outcropping, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Tahu was on his feet in an instant, pulling her into the darkness of a narrow crevice. They watched as 5 riders passed in the moonlight. Silas was among them. They were hunting, sweeping the land in a systematic search. They had not given up. "They're close," Anna whispered, her breath fogging in the frigid air. Tahu simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the riders until they disappeared. "We leave now." They rode through the night, pushing the horses to their limits. The close call frayed Anna's nerves. The questions that had been simmering in her mind began to boil over. This wasn't just about a key. It couldn't be. The obsession, the relentless pursuit. It was for something more. That night, huddled by a small, smokeless fire, Tahu looked at her, his expression serious. "The key is not the only thing you carried," he stated, his voice flat. "When I found you, you were clutching something else, a piece of paper." Anna froze. She had forgotten. In the chaos, in the fight for survival, she had completely forgotten. She reached into her coat, her fingers finding a folded, stiff paper she had shoved deep into a pocket. She pulled it out. It was a property deed. "My husband," she said, her voice shaking as she unfolded it. "He bought a small parcel of land before we left. He said it was an investment for our future." She stared at the document. It was signed by her husband David, and it detailed the sale of that same parcel of land to his brother, Silas. The document was dated the day before David was killed. He sold the land to Silas," Anna stammered, confused. "Why would he do that? And why would Silas still hunt me if he already has the land?" Tahu took the deed from her trembling hands. He stared at it, his eyes narrowing, tracing the coordinates marked on the survey map. A flicker of something, shock, recognition, crossed his face. "This is no ordinary land," he said, his voice a low growl. He pointed to a symbol etched near the property line, a circle with a lightning bolt through it. "This mark, I know this mark." "What is it?" Anna asked, leaning closer. Tahu looked up from the paper, and his eyes held a new, chilling intensity. "This is not a deed for farmland. This is a map, and it leads to a place my people call the Valley of Whispering Spirits. It is a sacred burial ground, a place forbidden to outsiders." He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. "Your husband did not sell a piece of land," he said. "He sold a secret. He sold my home." The revelation hit Anna like a physical blow. Her husband, David, the man she had loved and mourned, had betrayed a sacred trust. And Silas, his brother, now held the map. But it still didn't make sense. "If Silas has the deed, the map," Anna argued, her mind racing, "why does he still need the key? Why does he need me?" "Because the map is not the prize," Tahu said, his voice grim. "It only shows the way. The key unlocks the door." Suddenly, they were no longer just running. They were in a race to a sacred place that one of them was trying to protect, and the other was trying to plunder. And Anna was caught in the middle, carrying the one thing that could decide the outcome. The knowledge changed everything. The air between them grew thick with unspoken things. Tahu was no longer just her savior. He was a man whose sacred duty had been violated by her own husband. Was he helping her, or was he just using her to get to the key? Anna felt a new kind of fear, a fear of the man riding beside her. A few days later, the landscape began to change. The snowy plains gave way to rocky foothills. They were getting closer. Tahu grew more tense, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. One afternoon, they saw a column of smoke in the distance. Not from a campfire. It was the distinct smoke of a settlement, a trading post. "We need supplies," Tahu said gruffly. "Salt, ammunition, we will be quick." Anna felt a sense of dread. A post meant people. People meant questions. But they were low on food, and Tahu's caution was justified. The trading post was a rough place. A handful of log cabins, a saloon with drunken shouts spilling out, and a blacksmith's forge that belched black smoke into the sky. Men with hard eyes watched them as they rode in, their gazes lingering on Tahu's Cheyenne gear and then on Anna, a white woman traveling with him. "Wait here with the horses," Tahu commanded, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "Do not speak to anyone." He disappeared inside the main trading building. Anna stood by the horses, trying to make herself small, pulling her cloak tighter around her. She felt a dozen pairs of eyes on her back. That's when she heard it. A man's voice, lazy and drawling, coming from the saloon porch. "Well now, what have we here? That looks like a mighty fine horse, and a pretty little lady to go with it." Anna kept her eyes down, her heart pounding. She heard footsteps crunching in the dirt. A man stepped in front of her. He was big, grimy, with a yellow-toothed grin and a pistol strapped to his hip. "Don't be shy now," he slurred, reaching out to touch her hair. Before Anna could react, a blur of motion exploded from the trading post. Tahu was on the man in a heartbeat. It wasn't a fight. It was a storm of brutal efficiency. Tahu moved with a speed that was terrifying, a hand to the man's throat, a knee to his gut. The man crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. Tahu stood over him, his face a mask of cold fury. The entire trading post had gone silent. Every eye was on them. "Get on the horse," Tahu said to Anna, his voice dangerously low. "Now." They galloped out of the settlement, not looking back, but they both knew it was a mistake. They had been seen. Word would travel. A Cheyenne warrior with a white woman, a description that Silas's men would be listening for. They had just painted a target on their backs. That night, the silence between them was heavier than ever. "He could have killed you," Anna said, finally breaking it. "He did not," Tahu replied, staring into the flames of their fire. "You risked everything back there. For me." Tahu looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than grim determination in his eyes. It looked like pain. "Many winters ago," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I was a guardian of that valley. It was my honor, my life. But I was not the only one. We had an oath." He paused, the memory twisting his face. A white man came, a surveyor. He claimed he was working for the government. He was kind. He learned our ways. He became a friend. Anna felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "He betrayed us," Tahu continued, his voice hardening. "He sold a map to men like Silas. When we discovered his treason, we went to capture him. But someone warned him. He escaped." He looked directly at Anna. The one who warned him was a white woman. She was his wife. She chose him over the honor of my people. Because of her, he got away. Because of her, our sacred land is now in danger. I was blamed for the failure. I was cast out. I have been hunting him ever since. Anna's heart stopped. A surveyor, a white woman, a wife. It couldn't be. It was impossible. What was his name?" she asked, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. Tahu's eyes burned into hers, filled with a decade of hatred and betrayal. His name was David Caldwell. The world tilted. The fire, the trees, the stars, it all spun into a sickening blur. David. Her David. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a similar story. It was the story. Her husband wasn't the victim she had mourned. He was the villain Tahu had been hunting, the man who had betrayed an entire people, and she was the woman who had helped him escape. She hadn't known, of course. David had told her they were in danger, that the tribe had turned on him for a misunderstanding. He had begged her to help him pack, to create a diversion. She had believed him. She had chosen her husband, and in doing so, she had damned Tahu. You, Tahu whispered, the realization dawning on his face. He stood up, backing away from her as if she were a venomous snake. It was you. The man who had saved her life. The man she was beginning to trust. He wasn't her savior at all. He was her judge, her executioner. And she had just led him right to the prize her husband had stolen. The accusation hung in the air between them, colder and sharper than the winter wind. It was you, Tahu repeated, his voice no longer a whisper, but a low, dangerous growl. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by the embers of a long-nursed hatred. You were his wife. You helped him. I didn't know, Anna cried, scrambling to her feet. He lied to me. He told me his life was in danger, that there was a misunderstanding. I was his wife. I loved him. Love, Tahu spat the word like poison. Your love desecrated a holy place. Your love cost me my home, my honor. He turned his back on her, pacing like a caged wolf. The trust they had built, fragile as it was, had shattered into a million pieces. She was no longer a person to him. She was a ghost from his past, the living embodiment of his greatest failure. How could she have been so blind? David's secrecy, his sudden decision to join the wagon train west, his insistence on taking that specific route, it all clicked into place, forming a horrifying picture of deceit. And the worst part? She still had the key he had given her, telling her to guard it with her life. It wasn't a token of his love. It was a tool for his greed. We ride at first light, Tahu said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. We go to the valley. What are you going to do? Anna asked, her voice small. He turned to face her, his expression grim. I am going to finish what I started 10 years ago. I will protect the valley. And you will give me the key. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The rest of the journey was a nightmare of tense silence. They rode hard, the shared goal of reaching the valley now pulling them forward for entirely different reasons. For Tahu, it was about redemption. For Anna, it was about... She didn't even know anymore. Atonement? Justice? She looked at the brass key clutched in her hand. This small object held the power to right a terrible wrong. But it also felt like the last piece of her husband she had left, even a husband she now knew was a liar and a thief. They arrived at the entrance to the valley at dusk. It was a narrow canyon, its walls carved by millennia of wind and water. Even from a distance, Anna could feel a palpable sense of power emanating from the place. It felt ancient. It felt alive. They are already here, Tahu said, pointing to a faint trail of smoke rising from deep within the canyon. Silas and his men. They dismounted, tying the horses in a hidden grove of trees. Tahu moved with the lethal grace of a predator. He was no longer an outcast. He was a warrior returning to his battlefield. The entrance to the burial chambers is in the heart of the canyon, he explained, his voice a low whisper. It is hidden behind a waterfall. The door is made of stone and has not been opened in 100 years. It requires 2 keys to unlock. Anna stared at him. 2 keys, but I only have 1. A grim smile touched Tahu's lips. Your husband was clever, but he was not as clever as my ancestors. He stole one key. The other has never left the valley. He pulled a leather cord from around his neck. On it hung a key, carved from obsidian, almost identical to Anna's brass one. The Guardian's key. So that was the final piece. Silas had the map. Anna had one key. Tahu had the other. Without all three, the treasure, whatever it was, remained sealed. Silas knows this, Tahu continued. He knows he needs both you and the map. He will have lookouts posted. We must be silent. We must be shadows. They moved into the canyon as darkness fell. The air grew colder and the silence was so profound it felt heavy. The only sound was the distant murmur of the waterfall. They crept along the canyon walls, using the boulders and shadows for cover. Soon they saw the flicker of a campfire ahead. Two men stood guard, their rifles cradled in their arms. Tahu held up a hand, signaling for Anna to stop. He pointed to a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face, high above the guards. It was a perilous path, barely wide enough for a single person. Go, he whispered, his eyes locked on the guards. Follow the ledge. It will take you past them. I will create a diversion. No, Anna whispered back, her heart pounding. It's too dangerous. Let me help. Your help has cost me enough, he said, his words a final sharp cut. Now do as I say. Get to the waterfall. Wait for me. Before she could argue, he melted back into the shadows. Anna was alone. She looked at the narrow ledge, then at the guards below. This was it, the moment to choose. Was she still the victim, the pawn in someone else's game? Or was she something more? Taking a deep breath, she began to climb. Her fingers found holds in the cold rock. Her boots scraped for purchase. Below, she heard a sound, a rock clattering down the far side of the canyon. The guards turned, raising their rifles, shouting into the darkness. Tahu's diversion. With her heart in her throat, Anna scrambled along the ledge, the wind threatening to tear her from the cliff face. She didn't look down. She just focused on the sound of the waterfall, growing louder and louder, calling her forward. She finally reached the end of the ledge, dropping down into the shadows just as she heard shouts and the terrifying crack of a rifle shot echo through the canyon. She had made it past the guards, but she had no idea if Tahu was still alive. Anna pressed herself into the darkness, her body trembling. The rifle shot still echoed in her ears. Was Tahu hurt? Was he dead? She was utterly alone, deep inside enemy territory. Forcing herself to move, she followed the roar of the water. Soon, she saw it. A magnificent waterfall, a silver curtain of water cascading down a sheer rock face into a turquoise pool. It was breathtakingly beautiful. And just as Tahu had said, behind the curtain of water, she could just make out the dark, rectangular shape of a doorway set into the rock. She crept closer, her feet sinking into the damp earth near the pool. The air was thick with mist. She could see the camp now, just 100 yards away. Silas and 3 other men were gathered around a large fire, studying a map spread out on a rock. Her husband's map. They hadn't noticed her. They were focused on the problem at hand. The map is useless without the keys, Silas growled, slamming his fist on the rock. Where is she? That tracker better not have failed. Suddenly, a 5th man emerged from the darkness and walked into the firelight. Anna's breath caught in her throat. He was tall and lean, with a clean-shaven face that seemed out of place among the grizzled thugs. He wore a long, dark coat and carried himself with an air of cold authority. He was not one of Silas's men. He was clearly in charge. "Patience, Silas," the man said, his voice smooth and cultured. "Our tracker is the best. He will find the woman and the Cheyenne, and then we will have everything we need." Silas grumbled, but deferred to the newcomer, which told Anna everything she needed to know. This man was the real power here. He was the one David had made his deal with. Anna knew she had to hide. She slipped behind the waterfall, the icy water soaking her in an instant, chilling her to the bone. She found herself in a small, dry alcove directly in front of the stone door. The door was massive, made of a single slab of polished black rock. In its center were two keyholes, one brass, one obsidian. She waited, shivering, listening to the muffled voices from the camp. Minutes felt like hours. Had Tahu been captured? Was he leading them here right now? Then she heard a different sound. A soft scraping noise from the side of the alcove. She flattened herself against the stone door, her hand gripping the small knife Tahu had given her. A figure slipped through the waterfall as silent as a ghost. It was Tahu. He was alive, but he was hurt. There was a dark, wet stain spreading across his shoulder, and his face was pale in the dim light. "They have a tracker," he whispered, his breathing ragged. "Better than I thought. He wounded me, but I lost him in the river." He looked at the stone door, then at Anna. His eyes softened for just a moment. "You made it." "I thought you were dead," she breathed, a wave of relief washing over her. "Not yet," he said, leaning against the wall for support. "Give me the key." Anna hesitated. She looked at Tahu, bleeding in the darkness. She looked at the twin keyholes, and she thought of the cultured, cruel man by the fire. She thought of Silas. She thought of her husband's betrayal. Everything had led to this moment, to this door. But what lay behind it? Gold? Ancient artifacts? Or something else entirely? "What is in there?" she asked, her voice a whisper against the roar of the falls. "What is so valuable that they would kill so many for it?" Tahu looked at the door, a strange, reverent look on his face. "It is not a treasure," he said softly. "It is a prison." Anna stared at him, confused. "A prison?" "My ancestors were not just guardians," Tahu explained, his voice weak but firm. "They were keepers. Long ago, before the white man came, there was a war between the tribes. A great and terrible shaman rose to power. He used dark magic, twisted the land, and raised the dead to fight for him. He could not be killed by any weapon." He took a shaky breath. "So my ancestors, powerful medicine men, tricked him. They lured him into this chamber and sealed him inside using their strongest magic. A magic powered by the spirit of this valley. As long as the seal is intact, he sleeps. But if the door is opened, he'll be released," Anna finished, the horror of it dawning on her. This wasn't about greed. It was about power. The man in the dark coat didn't want to steal gold. He wanted to unleash a weapon, an ancient, unstoppable evil. David knew this, Tahu rasped. He didn't just sell a map to a treasure. He sold the location of a god. The key in Anna's hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Her husband hadn't just been a thief. He had been willing to unleash hell on earth for his own gain. Suddenly, shouts erupted from the camp. "Over here! I found a trail! It leads behind the waterfall!" The tracker. He had found them. "There's no time," Tahu said, holding out his hand. "Anna, the key! We have to destroy it. It's the only way." Anna looked at the brass key, then at Tahu's obsidian one. Destroying one was not enough. They both had to be destroyed. Footsteps splashed in the water just outside their hiding place. They were out of time. In that split second, Anna made a choice. She didn't hand Tahu the key. Instead, she jammed it into the brass keyhole. At the exact same moment, Tahu, seeing what she was doing, plunged his own key into the obsidian lock. There was a deep grinding sound of ancient mechanisms turning. A low hum filled the air, and the stone door began to glow with faint blue lines of energy. "What have you done?" Tahu cried, his eyes wide with horror. "They wanted the door open," Anna said, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her. "So we'll open it." She looked past him, to the figures now appearing through the waterfall. Silas, the man in the coat, their thugs, their rifles raised. "But," she added, a wild, desperate light in her eyes. "They'll have to go through us to get what's inside." The stone door groaned, a sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. The glowing blue lines pulsed with light. Behind them, a prison was opening. In front of them, their enemies were closing in. The man in the dark coat stepped through the waterfall, a triumphant smile on his lips. He applauded slowly, the sound echoing unnervingly in the small space. "Bravo," he said, his voice dripping with condescending praise. "Truly a dramatic flair. You've saved us the trouble of forcing you." He looked at the glowing door, his eyes alight with a fanatical gleam. "You have no idea what a service you have just rendered." Silas and his men fanned out, their rifles aimed squarely at Anna and the wounded Tahu. "It's over, Anna," Silas sneered. "Now step aside." Tahu struggled to his feet, positioning himself between Anna and the gunman. He held his knife, but he was pale and swaying, losing blood fast. "You will not touch this place," he hissed. The man in the coat chuckled. "Oh, I have no interest in touching it. I'm merely here to facilitate a release. Think of me as a parole officer." He took a step forward, and for the first time, Anna saw his face clearly in the pulsing light from the door. There was something familiar about his eyes, his aristocratic features. A ghost of a memory tugged at her mind. "Who are you?" she demanded. "A fair question," the man said. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Alistair Finch, and your husband David was a very dear and very profitable employee of mine." The name meant nothing to her, but the connection to David sent another wave of sickness through her. "My associates and I," Alistair continued, gesturing vaguely, "believe that this world is weak. It's bound by pathetic laws, petty morals. It needs to be cleansed, scoured clean by a power that doesn't understand compromise, a power that has slept for far too long." The stone door behind them shifted, grinding open by a few inches. A gust of wind, impossibly cold and stale, smelling of dust and ancient rot, billowed out from the crack. It felt wrong, unnatural. The gunman shuffled nervously. Even Silas looked unnerved. "You're insane," Anna breathed. "Sanity is a matter of perspective," Alistair countered smoothly. "Now I believe our guest of honor is awake. Step aside, both of you." Tahu didn't move. "I would rather die." "That can be arranged," Alistair said with a sigh. He nodded to Silas. Silas raised his rifle, a cruel grin spreading across his face. He aimed it not at Tahu, but at Anna. Last chance. The world slowed down. Anna saw the hammer on the rifle pull back. She saw the hate in Silas's eyes. She saw Tahu preparing to launch himself forward, a suicidal, desperate charge. And in that moment of absolute clarity, Anna knew there was only one move left to make. It wasn't a move of attack. It was a move of sacrifice. With a cry, she didn't step aside. She threw herself backward, slamming her entire body against the heavy, grinding stone door. The door, not yet fully open, was pushed back on its ancient track. With a deafening crunch, it slammed shut. The two keys, still in their locks, were caught in the immense pressure. There was a sharp crack of tortured metal and a splintering snap of stone. The brass key twisted and broke. The obsidian key shattered into a dozen pieces. The blue light died. The humming stopped. The cold wind vanished. Silence. The prison was sealed again, and the only means of opening it was destroyed forever. For a moment, everyone was frozen in shock. Alistair Finch's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You foolish, insignificant little—" He never finished the sentence. Tahu, seeing his chance, lunged. He wasn't aiming for Finch or Silas. He threw his knife with the last of his strength, not at a man, but at the lantern held by one of the thugs. The knife shattered the glass. Oil and flame spilled everywhere, igniting the dry moss and brush in the alcove. The space behind the waterfall erupted in a flash of fire. Chaos. Men screamed, swatting at flames. Gunshots went off wildly. In the confusion, Tahu grabbed Anna's arm, pulling her through the curtain of water and into the turquoise pool below. The cold shock of the water was a brutal awakening. They surfaced, gasping for air, as the alcove behind them became a blazing inferno. They could hear the enraged, thwarted screams of Alistair Finch. Tahu, his strength finally giving out, began to sink. Anna wrapped her arm around his chest, kicking with all her might, pulling him toward the far side of the pool, away from the fire and the guns. They scrambled onto the bank, collapsing onto the damp earth, exhausted and shivering. They had survived. They had won. But as Anna looked back at the fire raging behind the waterfall, she saw two figures emerge from the smoke. Silas and Alistair Finch. They had escaped the fire, and they were staring right at them, their faces promising a slow and painful death. They were trapped. Tahu was unconscious, bleeding heavily. Anna had only a small, useless knife. Across the pool, Silas was reloading his rifle, his movements filled with murderous intent. Alistair Finch stood beside him, directing him, his cultured facade stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. This was the end. After everything, this was how it ended. But then, a new sound. A war cry. It came from high above, from the top of the canyon walls. Anna looked up. Silhouetted against the night sky were figures, dozens of them, warriors on horseback, Cheyenne, Tahu's people. An arrow, fletched in black, whistled through the air and embedded itself in the ground just inches from Silas's boot. He jumped back with a yelp, fumbling his rifle. A voice, powerful and clear, echoed through the canyon in the Cheyenne language. Anna didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a command, a declaration of war. Alistair and Silas were frozen, looking up at the impossible sight of an entire war party that had appeared from nowhere. How? Then Anna saw him. Standing at the forefront of the warriors was an older man with a face like carved granite and eyes that held the wisdom of generations. He held a feathered lance, a symbol of authority, a chief. And beside him stood the tracker, the same man who had wounded Tahu. But he wasn't looking at Alistair or Silas. He was looking at Tahu's unconscious form, and his expression was not one of triumph, but of respect. The tracker hadn't been working for Alistair. He had been sent by his chief. He hadn't been hunting Tahu to help his enemies. He had been following him to see if the outcast's heart was still true, to see if he would honor his oath. Tahu's fight, his sacrifice, his willingness to die for the valley. It had been a test he had passed. The Cheyenne warriors began their descent into the canyon, a silent, deadly avalanche of justice. Alistair Finch, ever the pragmatist, saw the situation for what it was, a complete and utter loss. With a final curse directed at Anna, he turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness of the canyon like the snake he was. Silas, however, was not so smart. Blinded by greed and rage, he raised his rifle one last time, aiming for Anna. "If I can't have it, no one will," he screamed. Before he could pull the trigger, a second arrow struck him squarely in the chest. He staggered back, a look of shocked surprise on his face, before collapsing to the ground, dead. The battle was over before it had even begun. Warriors surrounded Anna and the fallen Tahu. They did not look at her with hostility, but with a quiet, solemn respect. The tracker and the chief approached. The chief knelt beside Tahu, placing a hand on his unwounded shoulder. He spoke softly in their tongue, his words a balm of forgiveness and welcome. The tracker looked at Anna. "He is a hero," the man said in perfect English. "He has restored his honor. And you have the heart of a warrior, Anna Caldwell." They carried Tahu away, taking him to be healed by their medicine men. Anna followed, no longer a prisoner or a pawn, but an honored guest. She had walked into this land a broken victim, left for dead in the snow. Now she stood among warriors, having faced down monsters both human and ancient. She had lost a husband but found the horrifying truth. She had lost her past but had forged a new future. The valley was safe. The world was safe. Months later, the snow had melted, replaced by the vibrant green of spring. The Valley of Whispering Spirits was at peace. Tahu had recovered. The wound had scarred, but his spirit was healed. He was no longer an outcast, but a celebrated hero among his people. Anna had stayed with the Cheyenne through the winter, learning their ways, finding a sense of peace she had never known. But she knew she couldn't stay forever. This was their home, not hers. She found Tahu standing on a bluff overlooking the valley. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time. "You will leave soon," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Anna replied. "I need to find my own place, my own path." She had to make sure Alistair Finch was brought to justice. The world needed to know what men like him were trying to do. She had a new purpose. Tahu nodded, understanding. "The world is wide, but you will always have a home here." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, firm, not the touch of a savior or a judge, but of an equal, a friend. "Thank you, Anna," he said, his voice filled with a gratitude that needed no further explanation. "Be safe, Tahu," she whispered. As she rode away from the valley, she didn't look back. She looked forward, toward the horizon. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but she was not afraid. The woman who had been left to die in the snow was gone. In her place was a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had stared into the heart of darkness and had not flinched. Her story was not over. In fact, it was just beginning. Anna's journey is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is found not in running from our past, but in turning to face the monsters it created. She was betrayed at every turn, but never gave up. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of survival, secrets, and justice, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out, and you never know what other incredible stories are waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for listening.